So tonight we have the opportunity to address this, and we've got a wonderful guest who's going to share her story with us, and that's Kristin Armstrong, and that's why you're here this evening. She's going to share some of her personal experiences and some disappointments, and at the end of her fairy tale relationship. And she has 3 beautiful children, and like I said, she just released her 5th book in the last week. All right, so Kristin, do you want to come up, and we're going to have an opportunity to musical chairs. Okay, is that any better? Yeah, I think so. Okay, excellent. Hi, everybody. Hey. This is such a natural setting to have a chat. So intimate. Well, thank you and welcome for coming this evening. We very much appreciate you stepping out and speaking to these ladies who have come to hear some of your story. So let me get going. So first off, let's hear a little bit more about you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you were like when you were growing up?
Well, when I was a little girl, if you were going to picture me, I would have a giant space between my front teeth. I had braces twice. I wore braids. I had freckles. I was kind of a nerdy, shy, quiet girl who loved animals. And my family moved about 13 times. So the sum of me as a child was I was the new kid, over and over again.
Wow. Well, I'll tell you what. We have different expectations of ourselves as we grow up. So what sort of expectations did you have of your life as you started approaching your 20s?
Well, being that nerdy child, I was somebody who always worked really hard in school. And I thought that with anything, any challenge that came to me, that the harder you worked at something or the more you pushed, the harder you tried, then you would automatically be successful. I thought that was my mentality. And so I grew up going through school, working hard, making good grades, and I graduated from high school, and I was voted most likely to succeed and best hair. So I thought that was a pretty winning combination for the shy new kid, and I was ready to go, take on the world. I went to Miami University, which is in Oxford, Ohio, not Florida, and I majored in mass communications. For a while, I thought I was going to be a newscaster, but then every time I had to take a speech class, I was petrified. So that didn't work out so well. And I graduated from college with honors.
Well, 2 things. You do have great hair.
Today's not the best day, though.
And you obviously got over whatever it was about the public speaking because you're here with us today. You've certainly done your share of it.
I'm kind of sweating.
I'm not totally over it. All right. Well, I'll tell you what. Back then, how would you have handled setbacks or problems when they arose?
I think that was the same as the hard work mentality. I think that came from both of my parents and my grandparents as well. And I think that was just how I was raised. When you have a difficulty, it's not something that you talk much about. You just kind of roll up your sleeves and dig in a little bit, and you do what needs to be done. And that's what people in my family do. And so I thought that that's what I would do. And the harder I worked, I thought things would just naturally work out. And I never really had anything that taught me to the contrary.
Well, I'll tell you what. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what your life looked like when you met Rex?
Okay, this was my 2nd job out of college. So I first worked for a video conferencing company called Retail Corporation. And then I worked briefly in sales at IBM, and across the street was this advertising and PR company. And I mentioned that I was kind of nerdy, so I was working in software sales, selling object-oriented database software, and it was really boring. Really boring. And so I would look across the street at this little advertising PR firm that had purple walls, and it was called Tate Austin Advertising and PR, and it was on the corner of Congress. You guys know Carrie Tate. She was eventually my boss, but I had to keep going in there and asking her for a job all the time. She'd say, "We are not hiring anyone." And furthermore, if we did hire someone, it would be somebody who had experience in advertising, PR, and a shoe. So I kept going back, and finally one day, it was just the perfect moment. I went in there and I said, "Do you have anything?" And she goes, "Actually, yes, one of our AEs just left. If you want this job still, when can you start?" I said, 2 weeks. I just have to go tell my boss. So I did, and I started working in advertising and PR. I loved it. And one of my clients was Lance, because he was doing his first inaugural Ride for the Roses, which is a fundraiser for what is now, the Lance Armstrong Foundation. And so that was just the first fundraiser in town, and I met him. I planned the press conference with another teammate and met him at the press conference. And he was completely cute. He had no hair. He was just recovering from cancer, and we were friends, and it was cool.
Okay, so you had a whirlwind courtship, and then you were married, and you moved over to France and Spain for training. So tell us what your life looked like when you were doing that.
Well, basically, as quickly as you said that, is as quickly as everything happened. Let me just tell you, we were friends, and we were dating other people, and eventually we became friends and spent more time together, and then there was a connection there, and we ended up starting to date. We'll back up, this is a good part. I switched jobs again, and I hadn't talked to him in a while because I thought he was still dating this girl. And then he was talking to me in the office, and he said, "So what's new with you?" And I said, "Well, I have this new job." And he said, "So are you still dating that guy?" I said, "No." "Are you still dating that girl?" I said, "No." And he said, "What are you doing tonight?" And I, shy girl, I said, "Something with you, I guess." And that was that. So we went to Europe together for fun in June, and we were engaged in October, and we were married in May, and then moved over to Europe and lived primarily in France, like 6 to 8 months a year, and that was the majority of the cycling season for professionals. So we would live there, and we would alternate some other places as well. Sometimes we would be in Santa Barbara for training, and then sometimes we'd be in Switzerland for altitude training. So we were kind of all over the place, really. And a little bit of time in Austin in the off season. So we did that for a few years, and then switched over to Spain.
Okay. And then you started having a family. So what was it like having a family overseas?
Well, that part was also really whirlwind because we got married in May, and then we had Luke in October. And that was because Lance had just gone through cancer, we went through in vitro fertilization, so that whole IVF process with all the shots, if there's anyone out there that knows that, that was lots of fun. And but we were blessed with Luke, and then 2 years after Luke, we had Grace and Isabel, twins. And it was really fun to live in that part of the world. It was a great gift and an experience, and I would not trade that for anything. I love languages, so I got the pleasure of being able to learn how to speak French and Spanish. They're now rusty, but it was a beautiful time. And but it wasn't a glamorous existence by any means. I mean, it sounds so fabulous to say, "Oh yes, I'm living with my husband and children, and we're living in the south of France, and I'm going to go shopping in Monaco today." Okay, it wasn't like that so much. It was, as an athlete, he's so serious, and it was not fun and games. It was more of, I felt like I was part of a team, and it was a lot of working together, not me on the bike. No, don't get me wrong. It was more me in the kitchen, me going to the market, me cooking things, me keeping the kids quiet when he took a nap, things like that, because his schedule would be, I mean, he might ride 6 or 8 hours a day and then come home, and depending on what ride he did, he would need a certain amount of food, that it had to be measured on the scale because it couldn't be too much, because you can't weigh too much. So it was just a lot of things that most people wouldn't probably think of, and it was a lot of just the unglamorous things of cooking and dishes and laundry and shopping. And it was a peaceful and it was a beautiful time. It's still a beautiful time in my memory. I love all of that.
You're right. I think our visual is that it was more glamorous when it turned out to be. Okay, so let me ask you. So let's go back to the year 2003. Probably a pretty tough year for you.
We have to go back there?
Don't make me. If you wouldn't mind sharing what 2003 looked like.
Well, does anybody know that game, Jenga? Okay, that's where you put all the little blocks and the blocks and the blocks.